The picture-perfect town of Millhaven, nestled where the autumn leaves turned fiery and the streets were always clean, knew the Bishop family as one of their brightest jewels. At its center was Aris Bishop, a man whose smile was as reliable as the sunrise and whose business, a chain of successful hardware stores, was built on a reputation of old-fashioned dependability. His wife, Elara, was his perfect complement. Where he was loud and social, she was a gentle, observing presence, a talented botanical illustrator who found her joy in the delicate veins of leaves and petals. Their 8-year-old son, Leo, was a happy boy, a whirlwind of curiosity and laughter. And then there was Diana, Aris's mother. Widowed young, she had poured her entire universe into her only son. To her, Aris was not just a man, but a legacy, a king who deserved a kingdom and a queen who would properly reflect his glory. Diana lived in a cozy cottage-style house, just 3 blocks from Aris and Elara's sprawling Victorian home. This proximity was no accident. She was a daily fixture, letting herself in with her own key, reorganizing cabinets to her liking, offering unsolicited advice on Leo's upbringing, and always looking at Elara with a gaze that seemed to measure and find wanting. Elara's art, Diana hinted, was a hobby, not a real contribution. Her quiet nature was mislabeled as aloofness. Her love for her family was never in question, but in Diana's eyes, it was never quite enough fanfare for a man like Aris. The first crack in the pristine veneer was almost imperceptible. It began with Aris's new business partner, a woman named Cassandra. She was a dynamo, a marketing consultant hired to revitalize the Bishop hardware brand. Where Elara found beauty in quiet growth, Cassandra was a spectacle of immediate bloom, loud, ambitious, and fiercely admiring of Aris's acumen. Meetings ran later. Weekend conferences out of town became frequent. Aris had a new energy about him, a restlessness that Elara initially mistook for passion for his work. She felt the distance growing like a chill seeping through a drafty window. When she timidly mentioned her loneliness to Diana one afternoon over tea, hoping for a mother's wisdom, the response was a cold sip and a colder stare. "A man like Aris needs room to soar, Elara," Diana said, placing her cup down with a definitive clink. "If you clipped his wings, you'd only have yourself to blame when he seeks a higher altitude." The message was clear. The problem was not Aris's absence, but Elara's failure to be more compelling. Unbeknownst to Elara, Diana had already met Cassandra. Aris had introduced them, and Diana was utterly charmed. Here was a woman who spoke of market shares and expansion, who laughed at Aris's jokes with a thrilling pitch, who dressed for success, not for a quiet afternoon in a garden. In Diana's mind, Cassandra was the upgrade her son deserved. So, she became an active architect of the affair. She covered for Aris's late nights, telling Elara he was helping with her frail plumbing. She vouched for his weekend trips, weaving elaborate tales of urgent supplier meetings. She even encouraged Leo to have sleepovers at her house, clearing the path for Aris's indiscretions. Each lie was a brick, and Diana laid them with the conviction of a woman building her son a better, shinier future, never noticing she was constructing a prison for them all. The unraveling began not with a shout, but with a silent, digital whisper. Elara, always perceptive to the subtle shifts in her environment, noticed a change in the light. It was the glow from Aris's phone, face up on his nightstand, pulsing with a new notification long after he'd fallen into a deep, satisfied sleep. A sleep he'd been falling into often, claiming total exhaustion from his booming business. The notification preview was just a single, heart-shaped emoji. It was enough to turn the chill in Elara's bones into a permanent winter. She did not confront him. Instead, the quiet illustrator became a silent investigator. Her art required patience, a keen eye for detail, and these skills found a new, painful purpose. She checked their shared phone bill online, finding a repeating number, text-heavy and call-frequent, listed under the alias C. Marketing. She noted the days Aris wore a cologne she hadn't bought him. A forgotten receipt in his sport coat pocket was for a boutique hotel an hour away, dated on an evening he'd told her he was inventorying at the flagship store. The final, irrevocable proof came from a place of innocent routine. Leo, for a school project, needed a family photo from their summer vacation. Aris, always busy, had told Leo to just pull one from his cloud storage. As Elara helped her son navigate his father's tablet, a sync occurred. A new album, titled Bishop Revitalization Plan, appeared. Inside were not store designs, but dozens of photos. Aris and Cassandra, beaming at a rooftop bar. Aris and Cassandra, hiking a trail Elara had always wanted to visit. Aris and Cassandra, their faces close, in what was unmistakably the master bedroom of a hotel suite. Elara's world didn't shatter, it crystallized. Every doubt, every dismissed intuition, every one of Diana's smooth alibis, snapped into a horrifying, clear picture. The betrayal was a two-headed monster, her husband's infidelity and her mother-in-law's conspiracy. She felt a surge of something hotter and fiercer than grief, a cold, clarifying fury. That night, after putting Leo to bed, she didn't pack in a frenzy. She moved with a methodical precision that was far more terrifying. She packed 2 suitcases, one for herself, with practical clothes and her most essential art tools, and one for Leo, filled with his favorite things. She took only the irreplaceable items, her portfolio, her grandmother's jewelry, Leo's baby book. She accessed the cloud from her own laptop and downloaded every incriminating photo, every document, saving them to a brand-new, encrypted drive. She closed their joint bank account, transferring exactly half into a new account in her name alone. She was not running. She was strategically withdrawing from a corrupted battlefield. Just before dawn, she loaded the suitcases into her car. She woke Leo gently, telling him they were going on a special, early morning adventure to see the mountains. The boy, sleepy but excited, asked no questions. As the first light of day touched the grand Victorian house, Elara placed a single sheet of paper on the kitchen island, right on the marble surface Diana had chosen. It was not a letter filled with anguish. It was a statement of fact. At the top, she had printed one of the clearest photos of Aris and Cassandra, their faces blurred just enough to be decent but their identities unmistakable. Beneath it, she had written only, "I see the full scope of your collaboration. Do not call. Do not come after us. Any attempt will result in this being sent to every business associate, every friend, and the local news. We are gone." She did not sign it. She simply walked out, strapped Leo into his car seat, and drove away from Millhaven, leaving the gilded cage of her life in the rearview mirror as the sun finally rose. Aris Bishop awoke to a silence that felt thick and wrong. The house didn't hum with the quiet morning sounds of Elara making tea or Leo's cartoons. It was a dead, hollow quiet. He found the paper on the island. As his eyes scanned the photo and the words, a cold nausea, far worse than any hangover, washed over him. This wasn't the tearful confrontation or the pleading he might have expected from his gentle wife. This was a declaration of war, issued with a devastating, surgical precision. His first panic call wasn't to the police or a lawyer. It was to his mother. Diana arrived within minutes, her face a mask of fury, but not at her son. She crumpled the note, dismissing it as a hysterical overreaction. "She's trying to scare you, to control you," Diana insisted, her voice sharp. "She's always been too emotional, too weak for you. This proves it." Instead of urging caution or remorse, Diana's instinct was to attack. She saw Elara's departure not as a consequence, but as an opportunity. With the timid wife out of the way, her son could be free to build a proper life with a proper partner like Cassandra. Together, they hired Martin Thorne, a divorce attorney known in legal circles not for his empathy, but for his brutality. Their strategy, devised by Diana and approved by Aris, was to paint Elara as mentally unstable, a neglectful mother who had abandoned her stable home in a fit of irrational jealousy. Diana would be their star witness. She began meticulously constructing her testimony, compiling a false narrative of Elara's supposed instability, her withdrawn nature, her obsession with her art over her family. They filed for immediate sole custody of Leo, alleging Elara was unfit. What they did not know was that Elara had been preparing for this exact move. When she was served with the aggressive custody papers at her sister's home in a neighboring state, she showed no surprise. Her own attorney, a calm but formidable woman named Sarah Chun, responded not with emotion, but with a devastating counterfiling. It contained the photos, arranged in a clear timeline. It included a log of dates, correlating Aris's claimed whereabouts with Diana's provided alibis, all contradicted by credit card statements and hotel receipts. Most damningly, Sarah Chun included a sworn affidavit from a private investigator, hired the day Elara left, which detailed Diana's numerous meetings with Cassandra, their lunches, their shared laughter. The narrative of a conspiring mother-in-law was laid bare. The first court hearing was a disaster for the bishops. Aris, accustomed to charm, found it melted under the cold gaze of the family court judge. Diana's performance, full of dramatic indignation, backfired when Elara's attorney calmly presented evidence that directly contradicted her statements. The judge, seeing through the charade, granted Elara temporary full custody and ordered a formal psychological evaluation of Aris, citing the toxic environment he and Diana had created. The local community, once solidly in the Bishop family's corner, began to fracture. Whispers turned into conversations. The story of the beloved hardware store owner, his fiery mistress, and his scheming mother was too salacious not to spread. Aris's reputation, the very bedrock of his business, began to develop deep, unseen cracks. The custody battle was a public bleeding of the Bishop family's good name, but the true mortal wound came from an entirely unexpected direction. The court, scrutinizing Aris's finances to determine child support, ordered a detailed forensic audit. It was meant to be routine, a look at income and assets. The accountant, a methodical man named Benji Cruz, started with the personal books, then, following procedure, expanded his gaze to the Bishop Hardware corporate accounts. At first, everything seemed in order. The stores were profitable. But Benji had a talent for spotting patterns where others saw noise. He noticed a series of irregular vendor payments from the main corporate account. They were made to a company called Summit Supply and Logistics, and the amounts were significant, always just under thresholds that would trigger more stringent internal reviews. The problem was, Benji couldn't find any contracts, invoices, or shipping manifests from Summit in the company's files. He dug deeper, tracing the electronic payments. The money flowed from Bishop Hardware to Summit's bank account, and then, within days, was dispersed. Some went to pay off high-interest charges on Aris's personal credit cards. Some went into a separate mortgage account for the Victorian house. A large portion was funneled into an offshore account. Summit Supply and Logistics was a shell company, a ghost. Its sole officer and owner, according to the state filings, was Aris Bishop. Benji Cruz, bound by law, reported his findings to the judge. The judge, in turn, had a mandatory duty to report suspected financial crimes to the state authorities. What began as a divorce proceeding now tripped a wire in a much larger system. A referral was made to the Financial Crimes Unit of the FBI. Special Agent Marie Rivera picked up the thread. Her investigation moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. She subpoenaed bank records, followed the digital money trails across borders, and interviewed past business partners and investors who had poured money into Bishop Hardware's expansion. The picture that emerged was one of a Ponzi scheme in its mid-stages. Aris had been using money from new investors to pay inflated returns to old ones, skimming a generous portion off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle, the house, the cars, the gifts for Cassandra. The fraud was not a desperate act of failing business. It was the greed of a man who believed his own myth and thought the rules did not apply to him. Diana, obsessed with the custody fight and vilifying Elara, was completely blind to the storm gathering around her son's business. She interpreted his growing panic as fear of losing Leo, not as dread of the approaching footsteps of federal agents. She urged him to fight harder, to spend more on the lawyer, never questioning where the money was coming from. The mother who had micromanaged every aspect of his personal life had never once looked at his balance sheets. Her support had empowered not just the affair, but the arrogance that fed the fraud. She had helped him believe he was untouchable. The end of the Bishop family's saga did not come in a courtroom, but in the harsh, blue-tinted light of dawn. It was a Tuesday. The FBI had moved quietly, securing arrest warrants and search warrants for the Victorian home and the main Bishop Hardware office. Agent Rivera believed in the element of surprise. At 5:45 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up silently to the curb of the grand house. Agents in tactical vests emblazoned with FBI moved swiftly to the front door. Diana, an early riser, was in the kitchen making tea, already dressed, already worrying over the day's legal strategy. She saw the dark shapes through the frosted glass of the front door and froze, her mind jumping to a ridiculous, hopeful thought. Had Elara done something so criminal they were here for her? The loud, authoritative knock shattered that illusion. Aris, groggy and in his robe, answered. His face, upon seeing the badges and the warrants, drained of all color. He looked like a man watching a tidal wave approach, knowing he could not outrun it. The agents were professional but firm. They read him his rights there in the foyer, under the crystal chandelier Diana had helped him pick out. They handcuffed his hands behind his back. The cold click of the metal was the loudest sound in the world. Diana screamed then, a raw, guttural sound of pure denial. She tried to rush forward, but an agent gently, firmly held her back. "You can't do this. This is a mistake. My son is a good man," she pleaded, her voice breaking. But the agents were unmoved, their focus on the suspect. They led Aris, shoeless and shivering in the crisp morning air, down the front walk. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, their cell phones raised. The social media posts would be up within minutes. FBI arresting Aris Bishop. As Aris was guided into the back of the SUV, he turned his head and met his mother's eyes for one last, searing moment. The look on his face wasn't one of love or forgiveness. It was a blaze of pure, undiluted accusation. In that silent exchange, he laid every consequence, every terrible choice, at her feet. Then the door closed, and the vehicle drove away. Inside, other agents began their systematic search. They boxed up computers, financial files, and personal documents. Diana, collapsed into a kitchen chair, could only watch as the life she had helped build was catalogued and taken away as evidence. Cassandra, upon seeing the news alert on her phone, immediately lawyered up and cut all contact. The business was frozen, its assets seized. By noon, the story was the lead on the local news, detailing not just the arrest, but the sordid backdrop of the affair and the bitter custody battle. The perfect portrait was not just cracked. It had been publicly incinerated. Diana was left alone in the echoing, violated house. The ghost of her son's accusing stared the only company she had. The final chapter of the Bishop story was not written in dramatic court speeches or prison breaks, but in the slow, grinding erosion of a life left behind. Aris, facing a mountain of evidence and the prospect of an even longer sentence if he fought, took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The Victorian home, purchased and mortgaged with illicit funds, was forfeited to the government. The hardware store chain, stripped of its assets and its founder's reputation, was dissolved, leaving employees without jobs and investors without their savings. Diana Bishop, once the proud matriarch of a local dynasty, now lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a complex that smelled of stale air and disinfectant. The money was gone, swallowed by legal fees and restitution orders. Her social circle evaporated. The women she'd lunched with, whose children she'd judged, now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a living cautionary tale. The community's judgment was absolute and silent. Her son did not want her. In his first and only letter from prison, Aris did not ask for comfort or updates. His words were sparse and icy. He wrote that her visits were not welcome, that her voice was the last one he wanted to hear. He blamed her unwavering, fawning support for inflating his ego to monstrous proportions. "You never told me no," he wrote. "You made every wrong thing feel right. Now look where your belief landed me." The letter was a life sentence for her, too. The only connection to her past life was a court-mandated, supervised video call with Leo once a month. Elara, from her new life, in a sunny coastal town hundreds of miles away, allowed it solely because the judge insisted. Diana would stare at the screen, at the grandson who had grown taller, his smile now reserved and polite. He talked about school, about the ocean, about his mother's successful art show. His world was full of light and peace, a world Diana had no part in building and every part in trying to destroy. The calls were a ritual of exquisite punishment, a monthly reminder of all she had lost and all she had poisoned. Regret became her permanent atmosphere. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore, but a dull, constant ache, like a weather system that never cleared. She replayed every moment, every lie she told for him, every criticism of Elara, every encouraging word she'd given to his affair. She had seen it as love, as a mother's duty to clear the path for her son's happiness. She never understood that by removing every obstacle, she had steered him directly off a cliff. Her support wasn't a shield. It was a weapon she had handed him, which he then used to destroy himself, his family, and finally her. In the suffocating silence of her apartment, Diana Bishop understood the true cost of her allegiance. She had not saved her son. She had, with the best of intentions, engineered the ruin of everyone she loved, and was left with nothing but the echoing, empty forever of her regret.